You'd walk through the doors and it felt less like a store and more like a warehouse built for kids, shelves stacked floor to ceiling with bikes, action figures, board games, aisles so long you could lose your parents in the Barbie section alone. And overhead, that jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid." At its peak, Toys R Us operated more than 1,500 stores worldwide, according to retail industry reporting, a company so dominant in its category that for years it simply was the toy store, the default answer before anyone had to think about where else to go. In September 2017, it filed for bankruptcy. By the following spring, every single U.S. location was gone. Here's what makes this one different from a lot of these stories. Toys R Us wasn't outcompeted on toys. It wasn't beaten by a scandal, a health crisis, or even primarily by changing kid culture. According to a company declaration filed in bankruptcy court, the retailer was carrying roughly $400 million a year in debt payments alone, money that had nothing to do with selling toys and everything to do with a financial deal made more than a decade before the company ever closed a single store. So this isn't really a story about toys losing their appeal. It's a story about a form of corporate debt most shoppers have never heard of, one that quietly determines whether a company can survive a bad year, long before anyone in the stores even knows it exists. The story starts in 1948, when Charles Lazarus opened a small children's furniture store in Washington, D.C., called Children's Supermart. Lazarus noticed something simple but sharp. Parents kept asking where they could buy toys, not furniture. So in 1957, he pivoted entirely, opening the first store built exclusively around toys, stocked wall-to-wall, organized like a supermarket instead of a specialty shop, at a time when most toy shopping still happened in cramped department store aisles or seasonally around the holidays. That format was the innovation. Toys R Us didn't just sell toys, it sold toys year-round at scale with a selection no competitor could match. Lazarus was also ahead of his time in using computer technology to track inventory and spot buying trends faster than his rivals, letting the company restock the right toys before competitors even realized what was selling. The company went public in 1978, and Geoffrey the Giraffe became one of the most recognizable mascots in American retail, appearing in commercials that turned "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid" into a jingle an entire generation still remembers. Growth continued through the 1980s and 90s. In 1996, the company launched Babies R Us, often built side by side with existing Toys R Us locations, expanding its reach into strollers, cribs, and baby gear. By the early 2000s, Toys R Us was operating well over 1,000 stores globally. But underneath that growth, the retail landscape was shifting fast, and Toys R Us's sales and profits had already started sliding by the time the company made the decision that would define the rest of its existence. By the early 2000s, Toys R Us was already losing ground. Big box retailers like Walmart and Target were undercutting toy prices as loss leaders, selling toys cheap to draw shoppers in for everything else on a shopping list. Toys R Us was still relying on toys as its entire business. Net earnings between 2000 and 2004 hovered in a narrow, unimpressive range, and the company's board concluded it needed a fundamentally different strategy to survive. In 2005, that strategy arrived in the form of a leveraged buyout. Three investment firms, Bain Capital, Kohlberg Kravis Roster, KKR, and the real estate giant Vornado Realty Trust acquired Toys R Us for $6.6 billion. Here's the part that matters most, and the part most shoppers never think about. A leveraged buyout doesn't mean the buyers simply paid $6.6 billion out of their own pockets. It means they used the company itself as collateral to borrow most of that money, and then loaded that debt directly onto Toys R Us's own books. Of the total deal value, more than $5.3 billion was financed through borrowed money. Prior to the buyout, the company carried around $1.86 billion in debt. After it closed, that number had jumped to roughly $5 billion. Think of it like buying a house with a massive mortgage, except instead of you paying that mortgage, the house itself is legally required to pay it every single month, whether or not it's earning enough income to cover it. For Toys R Us, that meant roughly $400 million a year, every year, just in interest payments, money that vanished before a single dollar could go toward renovating stores, building a competitive website, or matching the prices and convenience Amazon and Walmart were starting to offer. The buyout's owners weren't entirely idle. The company still spent around $250 million annually on store expansion and international growth under their ownership. But the debt load meant there was no meaningful cushion left for the kind of reinvention that was about to become non-negotiable. Through the late 2008s and into the 2010s, that debt load became a slow-motion trap. Toys R Us survived the 2008 recession but came out of it exhausted, having missed the modernization cycles competitors were investing in during that same stretch. Amazon kept growing its selection and convenience. Walmart and Target kept using toys as a way to pull people into stores already stocked with everything else on a shopping list. Toys R Us was stuck servicing debt that had nothing to do with any of that competition. Debt created purely by the structure of a financial deal from 2005, not by anything happening on the sales floor. The company cycled through 4 different CEOs over roughly 16 years, each tasked with turning around a business that structurally couldn't outinvest its own interest payments. In September 2017, Toys R Us filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, initially framed as a restructuring, an attempt to shed some of that debt while keeping stores open through the crucial holiday season. It didn't work. A general decline in toy sales that year meant competitors had leftover inventory to sell at high margins after the holidays. Inventory Toys R Us used to rely on selling itself at exactly the moment it had no financial flexibility left to compete on price. By March 2018, after failing to find a buyer, the company announced it would close every remaining U.S. store. The liquidation eliminated roughly 30,000 jobs. In a strange coda, the man who'd built the whole thing, Charles Lazarus, passed away that same month at age 94, just over a week after the closure news broke, having lived just long enough to see the ending of the store he'd spent nearly 60 years building. It's worth sitting with what actually killed Toys R Us. It wasn't a shift in what kids wanted to play with. It wasn't even really Amazon. It was a financial structure created a decade earlier, one that designed to let a handful of investment firms profit regardless of how the stores themselves performed, and one that left no room left over for the company to fight back when the fight actually came. Subscribe for more vanished chains. We're breaking down exactly how the brands you grew up with actually disappeared. Next time, we're heading back to the toy aisle from a different angle, the discount department store that helped invent the modern shopping experience before losing the very customers it created, Kmart. Did you have a favorite thing you always asked for at Toys R Us? Tell me in the comments. Toys R Us wasn't beaten by a better toy store. It was beaten by a mortgage nobody shopping there ever knew it was carrying.